Well, thank you, Steve, and it is really wonderful to see so many people have made it today. I know a lot of people have traveled from far away to come down. I already talked to somebody from Stockton and from Vallejo, and so that's wonderful that you came. And I know in some ways it must be a kind of strange experience for those of you who've been attached to this monastery for so many years as Olivetan Benedictines, to be now being enfolded by the Camaldolese. And so the first thing that those of us who've been Camaldolese Oblates for years would like to say is, welcome to the family. This is really wonderful. Our Oblate group, our local Oblate group, has been going for, anybody? 15 years maybe by now. Those of us who lived within 2-hour drive of the Hermitage. A number of years ago, we had one of the first Oblates of New Camaldolese Hermitage was named Margaret Joy Granger. And she decided early on that she was lonely down here. She didn't get a chance to go up to the Hermitage that often. And so she sent out an email to people she knew in the area that were also Oblates and said, how about if we started having, Saturday retreats, maybe every 3 or 4 months. We'll see if we can lure one of the monks down to give us a, seminar for the day and have Mass. And so that's how it got going. And there were other groups around the state doing the same thing. So along the way, we began to realize that this was getting to be a larger and larger family of Oblates, and that we were starting to pop up around the world. All of a sudden we heard about Henry in northern England, who had actually never been to the Hermitage, but had found the monastery online. Began reading the rule of St. Benedict, the brief rule of St. Romuald of Ravenna, which we'll be talking about today. And he said, this is what I'm called to. This is what I want to be. And so he went through his year of postulancy, or 2 years, whenever it was back then, and made his oblation at a church in northern England. And we didn't know about him until a group of us went on pilgrimage, went to visit some of the ancient sites of northern England and Scotland, ancient Christian sites. And in a restaurant, here came Henry, and he was so thrilled to meet a bunch of Oblates from his home monastery where he'd never yet had a chance to visit. So it's been an interesting. There's a whole group of Camaldolese Oblates now who have popped up in Australia and New Zealand. There was a priest who came years ago to the Hermitage and who thought, I think, for a while about becoming a monk himself, decided no, went back to Australia, began practicing the Camaldolese way of life, and people were drawn to it. Pretty soon they have apparently a very serious, thriving group in both countries. And Cyprian, about 2 months ago, was able to go, stay there for a bit, give retreats to them. And we've only met them via video teleconferencing. Actually, Father Daniel's been there several times. He's sort of considered their Oblate shepherd. And we have a little group of Oblates in Singapore now, So it's becoming I know that one of our Oblates is working with a woman in Belgium who's discerning whether to do this, and may well never be able to come in person either, but wants to practice this way of life. So it's pretty exciting. And the interesting thing is that the Camaldolese in America, at this point, the monks in final vows, I think it amounts to about 22 total between the 3 monasteries. And we still haven't quite got a handle on how many Oblates there are. People throw different figures around, but we know it's over 600. So this is worldwide. Of course, the bulk would be in California because this is where the Camaldolese are based. So there's ferment, I guess, happening here, and I don't think anyone yet quite knows what's going on, but it's exciting. So all that led to a point about 3 or 4 years ago where a group of Oblates said, we know the monks can't keep up with all these people. It's just impossible. Father Robert Hale at the monastery was trying to juggle all this, and it's not humanly possible to keep up with all of it. So the idea was born, and Pat Mitchell was definitely a big part of that. Why don't we see if we can marshal together a group of volunteers, experienced Oblates who'd be willing to go through some extra training, formation training, and offer themselves as individual mentors for those who are either inquirers who haven't yet decided whether they want to become a postulant, or in their year of postulancy where they're supposed to be reading and studying and thinking about all this and praying about all this, or even people who've been in for some time and feel like somewhere along the line they missed something that was critical, they haven't quite caught up to it yet. As you know, as Olivetans, there's so much material to read. There's so many resources, and it's difficult sometimes to put your hand on exactly what it is you need. So we kept meeting about it, a little group of us, talking about, what sorts of resources would be, what were helpful to us, what can we see as being helpful to this kind of group we're talking about being of help to. And we finally it got off the ground. It took a long time, but it did. And it was announced, I think it was at the 2013 or 14 Assembly of Oblates. That's another thing we do as Camaldolese Oblates. Once a year, we have what we call the Great Assembly. And we meet, the last year we met up in San Juan Bautista at the Franciscan guest house up there. I can never remember the name of. Beautiful retreat center. And we're meeting there again this year in August, and all of you would be welcome to that. There'll be more information about it. But it's a full weekend with seminars by the monks, worship together, some meetings of Oblate committees that are involved in various things. And we announced it at one of these assemblies and then got to work. And finally, about a year ago, we turned it over to a group of monks at New Camaldolese and said, here's some suggested names. We think these people would be interested and be good at this peer mentoring thing. You guys know all of us. You make the choices. Part of the parameters were we wanted to try to get people around the country in places where there's no access to the monasteries. If you live up in the Bay Area, Incarnation Monastery in Berkeley is right there, and they have a very thriving group of Oblates up there because they can go to Mass weekly. They can go to the many events that are planned up there. This is an incredible gift to all of us who are local. I mean, we can come here for weekday Mass. We can drop in on a Saturday when something's going on. But there's a lot of people that don't have access to that, and they're trying to make a go of it by themselves. So we purposely suggested people in other parts of the country. And the monks came up with a list of about 14. Pat was on it. Yes.
Are you aware, Paula, of how the Oblates from the monastery here were formed?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Could we hold off on that until later this afternoon? It would fit in better at that point.
Okay. You're talking about the Camaldolese.
Yes.
As though we haven't been formed. And so
yes.
I guess you didn't know how well formed we were.
Well, definitely. And that's why, and I'll get to why we chose the topics we've chosen for these 3 sessions. Because we felt like those would be things you probably didn't know much about because they weren't part of the Olivetan history or whatever.
Other thing is our teaching through Abbot David for so many years, and then Father Ray and now Father Steve has educated us extremely well.
That's great. Yeah. So what we're trying to do in these next 3 sessions would be to talk about things that might not have been stressed in your formation training because they weren't necessarily part of the charism of your group. So, if that makes sense, that's why today we'll be talking about the specific charism of the Camaldolese. So, but that's wonderful to have a really solid background in Benedictine monasticism. And that's what we all share, the Camaldolese and the Olivetans. That's our and the Vayermans, or whatever you guys are called. Whoever you may be.
Paula, could I just make just one little intervention at this point?
Yes.
You know, Camaldolese oblates are like an umbrella under the Camaldolese board. There's no such thing as Olivetan oblates.
Oh, okay.
Every Olivetan monastery has its own oblates.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so there are oblates of the Monastery of the Risen Christ.
Uh-huh.
And the Monastery of the Risen Christ happens to belong
to the
Olivetan congregation.
Okay.
But it's not the same kind of, like the Camaldolese family.
I see. Okay. That's good to know. You're more autonomous in a way. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's great.
Yes. Very few of our oblates know much about Monte Oliveto. I mean, some do because they've been there. But...
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Anyway, the monks selected these 14 people. We set up formation weekends every 6 months for this group up at the Hermitage, and we're now about to hit our third one of those. And we finally settled on, let's try to do a version of what the monks do when they come in for formation. We're going to try to read what they're reading and study what they're studying, because we really felt like there were so many, even though it seems like such a completely different way of life to be inside of a monastery following the monastic schedule versus being out in the world doing the myriad of things we all do. We felt like there was so much common ground between the monks and us that we could incorporate a lot of their strategies for formation. So that's what we've been doing. And the program itself, we felt ready to say, okay, we're open for business at this point. That announcement came out a couple months ago, where if you as a new Camaldolese oblate would like to have your own peer mentor for a while, someone who would be willing to email back and forth to you, talk on the phone, if they happen to live close to you, maybe meet face to face, no more than once every 1 or 2 months maximum, but just a way to touch base, that's now open to you. The way you would get one of those people is to get in touch with me, and I'll leave my email address on the whiteboard or something in there so you can copy that down. Or Mike Millard, who is the co-director of this program. Between us, we'll find someone for you. But when Steve and I began talking about the fact that there were so many of you committed oblates of this monastery who are now becoming Camaldolese, I thought, wow, we might run out of peer mentors. So that's why we came up with this idea. Let's do these sessions once every month for the next 3 months, just to try to highlight the areas we think you might not have a background in. And that would get you up and running in this new identity of the Camaldolese oblate. So I hope that all makes sense. And part of this big project, it's gotten pretty complicated, but part of it is we also decided as oblates that it would be very beneficial if we could somehow gather together in writing a sort of guidebook. There's so many wonderful resources, and the primary one for Camaldolese oblates has always been this one, The Privilege of Love. This was the book we asked you all to buy and read a chapter from. But if you have dived into it, you know that if you look in the bibliography, it's all Italian sources, that many of the people who wrote this book are marvelous scholars, but they're speaking at a level that's sometimes difficult for people to it's not easily accessible at times. So we thought, let's just cull from all of these sources, try to put it into this, we're calling it our little vade mecum, which means small guidebook that you can slip into your pocket. It won't be that size, but that was a medieval term for something you could carry around and keep referring back to. I'm hoping by the end of our last session in March, we will be ready to give you part of that. We have a little committee working hard on that, and so that would be another way for you to go. Part of each of these chapters kind of sums up everything, and then there's a long list of resources you can go to for reading online or whatever. Another blessing that has come our way is a young man who's been coming to most of these Saturday sessions we've had over the years for various things and taping them and uploading them to YouTube. So if you are interested, there's a channel on YouTube called Camaldolese Oblate. And just go there and you'll see talks by Cyprian, all filmed right here at MRC. So that's also available at this point. So before the end of the day, I will definitely pass out the list of resources on this particular topic, which is the Camaldolese charism. Are there any questions right now before I launch into...
Could you just repeat the YouTube?
Yes, it's just Camaldolese Oblate, all one word. And I think it's oblate, not oblates. So if you go into YouTube and it says search, that's all you type and they'll come right up. And I think some of them are possibly audio only, I'm not sure. But anyway, anything else? All right. So I think the first thing to look at is and you please, Steve, jump in if I'm saying this wrong. What is a charism? And I'm talking about that in the kind of official church meaning of it. What does it mean when you talk about the charism of an order or a congregation, or as they call it nowadays a lot, religious institute? What's that mean? It refers to a special spiritual orientation of a specific institute or group. And, for example, it could be most focused on offering aid to the poor. You know, there are orders that are devoted to that. The Franciscans are well known for that their special gift is working with the poor. Or spending hours in silent mystical prayer like the Carmelites, Teresa of Avila. The charism of an institute is also influenced by the particular rule that they may live under. And I don't know that all orders have a rule they live under, but I'm guessing.
Most orders that are contemplative, or at least monastic, follow the rule of St. Benedict.
St. Benedict, yeah.
And of course, Franciscans follow the rule of
St. Francis. Mm-hmm.
And apostolic orders follow the rule of St. Augustine. Mm-hmm. So those are the main three. Right.
St. Basil shows up in the Greek Orthodox monastic world. Right. And so these rules, of course, were all written long ago. The youngest of them are probably the rule of St. Francis, which would be about 800 years old by now. And so vows of obedience to a particular rule combined with this special spiritual orientation of this particular group are what give each of these institutes their own special flavor. So as Oblates of Monastery of the Risen Christ, you were drawn to a particular flavor of this group of people you were worshiping with or whatever. Same with us, who were drawn to the Hermitage. The charism of the Camaldolese is referred to as the triplex bonum, which is Latin for threefold good. Threefold good. And those three things are community, solitude, and nowadays they refer to it usually as evangelization. For centuries it was simply called martyrdom. And there's a big story. There's a story about that, why it's called that. If you're reading Camaldolese literature about this, the traditional terms for these three goods would be the privilege of love, which referred to community life, golden solitude, which referred to the life of the hermit. Saint Romuald of Ravenna, who lived about 1,000 years ago, who was born in the 900s, began as a Benedictine monk in a Cluniac Benedictine congregation. Cluny was a great reform that took place during medieval times. So he was in one of these big churches, big monasteries in Ravenna, Italy, St. Apollinaire in Classe. And he went in very idealistically as a young man, discovered that he was somewhat disappointed in the practice of his fellow monks in this monastery. And he began speaking up about that and became a very unpopular guy. No one likes to be criticized for not living up to their ideals. And so eventually he asked for permission to leave and to go study or live with an old hermit, kind of in the model of the Desert Fathers, named Marino, who turned out to be a pretty tough guy and beat him up a little bit until they worked out something, a different training method. But anyway, so essentially Romuald was really from almost from the beginning that he realized he could do this. He was drawn to the eremitical or hermit life. And so that is part of the flavor of the Camaldolese. It has been all the way through. He himself never planned on starting a new order or founding a new order. In fact, officially, he's not called the founder of the Camaldolese. I think Cyprian refers to him as the inspirer, not the founder, because it wasn't for about 100 years after his death that the order was actually called into being by the Pope, who decided that there was something special going on here with this group of monasteries that Romuald had been involved with. He really spent his whole life as a reformer and sometimes as a founder of a specific little house. But his focus was very much on how to create a group of hermits or help hermits not be crazy. Because so often these people that would go off on their own would get all wound up and they would start practicing these excessive kinds of disciplines, not eating at all, for days or whatever, because they were thrilled by the stories of the Desert Fathers, the great stories of the desert. And so, and they would either suffer burnout or insanity, or they would become bad people. They'd become arrogant and judgmental because they felt like they were so much better than everybody else. He just felt like these people need some direction, And yes, it's a wonderful calling to solitude, but the only people for whom it's safe to become hermits are people who've been formed first in community. So that's why there's always been this really strong link between the cenobium or monastery life and the eremitical or hermit life. That those two things are connected, and the Camaldolese symbol of the two doves drinking from the chalice that you've probably seen, or the fountain. For a long time, that it stands for a number of neat things, but one of the main things was the connection between those two, the monastery and the hermitage. So he probably reformed more monasteries than he did hermitages, but his heart was really with the hermit. So the third good, then, that's the connection between those two first goods. The third good was known in the day as Evangelium Paganorum, which is Latin for evangelizing the pagans. This all came about, so it's been referred to over the years as simply martyrdom, and I'll get back to the history of that third good. So the goal then today and later, as you're reading about it, is to understand which part of the threefold Camaldolese, what each part of the Camaldolese charism means, and what the implications are for you as oblates. How does that work in your oblate life? This afternoon, we'll take some time in the last session for those people here who have been oblates for a while as Camaldolese to offer, their own stories about how this has worked in their lives. How have you turned to this threefold good along the way? Because it really does it does present a kind of structure on which you can hang a life. The first person to put the Camaldolese charism into words, this threefold good, was a monk and a biographer called Bruno of Querfurt, Querfurt, and he lived at the time of Romuald. He was a contemporary of Romuald. He was also a friend and a spiritual advisor to this very young emperor, Otto III, who had been crowned king of Germany at the age of 3. And then 16, he was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. He was not Italian. He was from the Germanic line of emperors who'd been in Rome for centuries. He longed to become a monk, even though he was an emperor. And he was counting on the days till he could shed his royal garments and put on a simple robe. So there was a legitimate call he appeared to have had, but he was also quite political. And he, so it's a mixed bag when you start reading the history of this. One of the people that had really influenced him was a monk from Prague named Adalbert, and he had been one of his tutors. And he impressed this young emperor so much. And you read these stories a lot through history about different mentors that people like Alexander the Great had. I think, wasn't it Aristotle was one of his tutors or whatever? They can change the whole course of history because someone has been a good mentor to them. And Adalbert was. But Adalbert went back to Prague and was martyred by the hands of Prussians in northern Poland. So Otto, really moved by the death of his beloved mentor, made a pilgrimage up there to his tomb, came back to Rome, and he began secretly visiting one of Romuald's hermitages that had been established near the city. On one of these visits, this young emperor made a very solemn vow. He said, "From this very hour, I promise God and all his saints that when 3 years have passed, and I have restored order in the empire, I shall renounce my throne and distribute the riches I inherited from my mother. Then, naked, I shall give my all to Christ." One of his greatest desires was that some of Romuald's disciples would be brave enough to go to Poland as missionaries. He wanted to do this, I think, in honor of Adalbert. And he could envision exactly how all this would work. He had a plan for this. And Bruno describes this. Bruno of Querfurt, who was the biographer of Romuald, describes this. And this is where the first time we hear this threefold good being articulated. Here are the words. "They would build a monastery in Christian territory, but near an area where pagans dwell, secluded and surrounded by woods. This would offer a threefold advantage: the community life, which is what novices want, golden solitude for those who are mature and who thirst for the living God, and the preaching of the gospel to the pagans for those who long to be freed from this life in order to be with Christ." In other words, those people who were actually longing to die for the sake of Christ, who actually wanted to embrace martyrdom, which was a very big thing in that era, and previous to that, in the early centuries of Christianity, there had been so much martyrdom because of the oppression that Christians were living under the Roman Empire. And when that began to lift off after Constantine became emperor in the 300s, there was this new form of martyrdom that began, which was referred to as white martyrdom. It was those who were willing to give their lives unconditionally for Christ, and usually that meant going out to the desert and living as hermits. So all of this stuff was sort of swirling around in this vision that Otto had. Poor Otto. He did not make it to become a monk. He died at only 23. And he did a lot in those 23 years, I guess, starting with being the king of Germany at 3. But 4 disciples of Romuald, well, 2 of them, left Rome, went up to Poland, got 2 more young guys to join them as monks, and then wound up martyred. And it was kind of not a totally glorious martyrdom. They were murdered at night by robbers in search of who thought they had silver or gold. And their cook died with them, and so he became one of the 5 brothers. And this is kind of a foundational story for the Camaldolese. And at the end of the day, we'll point out some other resources that they're translations from the Italian. One of them is called The Life of the 5 Brothers. But that's where we get the first articulation of this threefold good. Are there any questions up to this point at all? Yes?
One thing as you read the book, you talk a lot about martyrdom. How does that apply in 2017?
Yes, we'll talk about that this afternoon when we talk about the third good, you know. But also keep in mind that we're back to living in an era of martyrdom. I mean, there have been tons of Christians suffering death for their faith, and so this is not an unknown thing to happen in our day either. But how that translates into being Camaldolese is another story. So we'll talk about that this afternoon specifically.
Paula?
Yes.
For the hermits, then and then today, did, after they were trained in the community, after it was organized better, were the hermits more doing this for themselves to try to grow closer to God, and then they would come back into community?
Yeah, that's always been an interesting question about solitaries. What is the point of being a solitary? And one of the things they talk about a lot in Camaldolese life is the cell, you know, the life of the cell. And Father Robert pointed out last time we were discussing this at one of our formation retreats, he said, well, just remember, a person appears to be going into solitude in their cell, but it's really crowded in there. So there's first of all, there's the Holy Trinity, you know. Then there are all the angels and saints, and those who have died, the cloud of witnesses. And then the presence of the world is still with that person. And so it's meant as a kind of, what would I call an incubator for prayer, for deep prayer, where all distractions possible are quieted down, and it's that person in that silence alone. And yes, and there was an element of Ramiel too, which had to do with mystical prayer. And so that's the point of it. It's a life of very focused, concentrated prayer. And it goes back to the passage in the Bible, pray without ceasing. That was the goal of the hermit, was to pray without ceasing.
Even without being called a hermit, even most of us in our daily life today can still have that solitude, that time of contemplation and stillness. Sure, and that's, again, what we'll talk about this afternoon is how this gets translated into oblate lives. Because obviously we're not living in caves. None of us are, and we have to figure out how to adjust life to incorporate this particular good of solitude. So community. As I said, Bruno suggests, and he's in a long line of wise people in the monastic tradition, that those who are new to the monastic life need to be formed in community before they're old enough and wise enough to become a hermit. Yes?
Now, is that Bruno of
Corfert?
Bruno of Clover?
No.
That's a whole different
No, he's a different guy. Well,
he's still involved too, isn't he? Was it all?
Yeah, there were several Brunos in the history of, but this is the first one. He's the contemporary of Ramiel. Yeah. So he's simply following the advice of Saint Benedict. And those of you who have spent a lot of time studying the life of Benedict know that, he too spent time as a solitary, and he realized how much challenge the hermit faces, how exposed and vulnerable you are to, number one, the confrontation with the self, all by your own sim in that self. There was the idea that a hermit was specifically going out to fight evil. That the hermit was a soldier who had been sent out to do battle with Satan and the demons. So you had to be a powerful, strong, very centered person to be able to handle that kind of spiritual challenge. And so being formed in community ahead of time is the way to go. Cenobitical life, that is a group of monks living together as community, presents, of course, immediate and practical challenges, just like all of us know who live in families, right? You can't get rid of each other. And you can't ignore or avoid the fact that these challenges exist. A monk has to learn to get along with his brothers, even the ones who make him angry or the ones he doesn't particularly like. But since he can't change them, then he's forced to look back at himself. He must confront himself, just like we have to do in our lives. What exactly is it that's making him so angry? Does he feel unappreciated, overworked, overlooked? Does he constantly find himself passing judgment on his fellow monks? How might he need to change in order to get along? And St. Benedict believed that these rough edges are worn down slowly, as we have to constantly navigate the kind of relationships that we're part of when we live in a communal setting. Thanks to his brothers, the would-be monk is taught something essential to his success in monastic life, which is, those of you who've studied the rule, what's the point? Where's it all headed?
Say the question again.
What's the outcome of living a Benedictine lifestyle?
Growing closer to God.
Growing closer, but what has to happen to us first before we can grow? What's in the way of that? Thank you. The big Benedictine word, humility, right? It's that calming of the clamoring of the ego and the self that has to finally be dealt with. And so throwing an ego into the midst of a community of other egos is guaranteed to either cause a civil war or everybody's got to change. Everybody has to somehow begin grappling with who they are, confronting the self. So that's a huge plus of community life. But it isn't just this rough and tumble of community living that helps form a strong monk. It's also the routine, obviously. The liturgy of the hours, the daily Eucharist, meals that always happen exactly at the same time every day, whether you're hungry or not, or whether you're really hungry and it isn't happening yet. The same hours each day that's devoted to a particular duty. I remember Brother Joshua at the Hermitage for years. Every single day at about 12:30, the bell would ring for lunch, and you'd see the little electric vehicle coming down the hill to the guest house, and here would be the back end filled with trays of food from the kitchen, and he would take them into the kitchen so we could all go in. He did that day after day after day for years and years and years, And I'm sure Father Steve, he's always in his Prius on the road. Right? He never knows where he's going to sleep that night. But what he does know is he's going to spend a lot of time in the Prius because his duty in this group, this community in which he lives, is to give retreats, is to offer and to teach, So that's part of what forms a monk, is this kind of dailiness and regularity of practice. Oh, okay, good. I thought I was. Yeah. I thought I was scaring you away from Oblate life. A monk who is faithful to this retreat or this routine day after day, then builds a sturdy trellis. I read that years ago in a book written by a Buddhist about Benedictinism, and he referred to the rule as a trellis on which you grow. It helps support you as you grow and mature in your spiritual life. Yeah.
Along that same line,
yeah.
The word that we have for rule in Latin, not in Latin, in Italian, is relia, R-E-G-L-A. And relia can mean a trellis.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
So it's right there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's a support system. you know. And we're not going to go along this trail of thinking, but when just think about that later in light of what our surrounding culture preaches as the good life. Is it this kind of ordered, regular, disciplined structure, or is it something completely different? Is it a vision of, sort of total spontaneous freedom to react and respond to anything the way that you're currently feeling at the moment, and that to live this kind of orderly, structured, disciplined way is actually mega boring, And that's part of why this is such a radically alternative way to live nowadays, is we're bucking a cultural wisdom about what constitutes the good life. The daily schedule, then, it fosters an appreciation for discipline and healthy habits that can help if and when there is a call to greater solitude. And even among the monasteries that Romuald worked with in his day, many monks did not become hermits. They remained in the cenobium, and that's fine too. That might have been their calling too. To not only survive but flourish, the would-be hermit must be able to resist a particularly powerful array of temptations. Well, you tell me. What happens to you when you're cast upon your own resources for a while with nobody around? What starts bubbling up?
Distractions.
Like, you mean what? Mental?
It could be behavioral or mental.
Okay. So here you are in solitude, presumably to pray at a very deep and mystical level. And what are you thinking about?
Is the laundry done?
Yeah, that's right. Sure.
Oh, I forgot to unplug the coffee.
Yeah, sure. Connie?
My favorite is catastrophic thinking. I can form all kinds of disasters in that quiet time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so anxiety begins to seep in, a sense of doom or futility. How about self-pity? That's a good one, I think. And how about the secret kinds of self-indulgence we engage in when we're not accountable to anybody because we're in solitude, right? Don't ever go into your hermit cave if there's a refrigerator close by. Pride, we mentioned that already. When you can begin to think that you're a law unto yourself. Here I am. I'm this pretty amazing person who can go into solitude and pray or whatever, and then it's easy to start looking and comparing oneself with others, right? So, Romuald saw that. Both Benedict and Romuald saw that, and they believed then that a critical thing that had to be learned and taught and developed in a monk before that monk was safe to be a hermit was, guess, what do you think? The outcome of all of this, of dealing with our own stuff, of confronting that stuff honestly, of trying to work out relationships with other people for the sake of peace and harmony. What develops out of all that? Hopefully. An ease in
Self-discipline?
that, for sure. What? Prayer? Hopefully, that's the...
This main folk wrote a wonderful book about thoughts matter.
Yes.
That really lays out how our minds work.
Yeah.
How you can move more into a deeper prayer.
Sure.
Control of that.
That's huge.
Becoming aware of it. Even when you're just walking down the street, becoming aware of your thoughts.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All of those are part of it. How about love? Right? It is to be able to love as God loves. That's the goal of the monastic life, according to, St. Benedict, according to St. Romuald. So living in community certainly brings us up against our idealistic fantasies about how much we love humanity, right? How many times have we met people who are like huge social activists for the good of humanity who actually can't stand individual people because they're just irritating or aggravating or whatever. So there's a kind of reality check that takes place in community that we just can't avoid. It puts right in front of us where we might be kidding ourselves when we think, that we are humble and loving people already and we don't need all this. So community living ultimately teaches love. If we survive it, it teaches love. I mean, I think anybody who's been in a really long marriage, most people will say, we're happier now than we ever were when we were young idiots. You know, when we had just gotten married and we had this vision for what our lives were going to be, and all we did was fight about it. Or, you know, we kept having to negotiate who had the power over this and who had the power over this. And then there's this space of peace and acceptance of that partner that happens in those later years. Hopefully, that's an enormous blessing in marriages. And that's what these two, Benedict and Romuald both, hoped would take place ultimately in this community. Because it's one thing to reject envy or stop judging others, but it's another and quite different thing to begin sincerely loving those people with whom we live. So this, you know, we're talking about the monastic ideal of koinonia, that Christian community and communion. And this koinonia is rooted and grounded in the kind of love we see described in the Gospel of St. John. You know, as it says in 1 John, God is love. And the word koinonia points, of course, to the Trinity itself, which is this community and loving relationship with each of the members. Thus, the Camaldolese community strives to be, really truly strives to be a family of brothers and sisters in Christ. The Oblates, friends, and guests who come and go from the monastery are part of this extended family. And I have loved this quote from Benedict Colati, who was the Camaldolese prior general for 18 years in the 20th century. He says, "Only love remains, only a monasticism shaped through and through with love. Singing with love is credible." I thought that was a beautiful description. Did you have more to add, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to...
And then we'll take a break between then and when I finish in Mass. Whereas Paula was just speaking from a positive perspective, in a sense, about the privilege of love, let me just say this as a way to describe both monks and nuns. Monks and nuns are street angels and house devils. You know, shadow comes up. My friend Mary Wolfseline once wrote a book called The Shadow Side of Community and the Growth of the Self. And sometimes what she was getting at is our true self doesn't really grow unless we're faced with living with other people's shadow side. Now, I just came back from Three Rivers. Three Rivers is the diocesan retreat house for the Diocese of Fresno. And by the way, sitting at the back is the Chancellor of the Diocese of Fresno, Teresa Dominguez. And this is the 50th anniversary of the diocese. And their patroness is St. Therese of Lisieux. And so they asked me, in honor of the 50th anniversary, to do the retreat on St. Therese. Now, St. Therese wrote some memoirs. They're now called Story of a Soul. She never thought they would be published. She wrote them at the request first of her sister, who was the prioress at that time. And then when there was a new prioress, the new prioress said, well, she's writing memoirs for me as well. And so she requested, a second notebook of memoirs. And one of the things that Therese talks about often, especially in that second book of memoirs, are living with difficult nuns. And her relief from living with the difficult nuns was Lectio Divina. And especially on the Gospels. And one day, Therese was reading the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, both in Matthew and in Luke's version, it says, love your enemies. And Therese started really thinking about that phrase, love your enemies. And her first reaction was, well, we're Carmelite nuns. There are no enemies in Carmel. But wait a minute. There are feelings. There are no enemies. But there are feelings. And I have to deal, Therese says, with those feelings within myself. And as she began analyzing the feelings within herself, she saw that some of those feelings were feelings of hostility. And underneath that hostility, there was some violence. And she started scratching her head. And she started to say, maybe there are enemies in Carmel. But it's not that they've made themselves enemy to me. It's that I've made them enemy to me. That was Therese's great insight. And as a result of that, she was able, in a very real way, not to flee from difficult circumstances. You know, because when one nun got up on her high horse and did that in Therese's presence, Therese would turn into a shrinking violet, and run away. And finally she learned how to stand in her own 2 feet in front of that nun. And one day, the nun that she couldn't stand the most came up to her and said, Therese, every time I see you, you smile at me. You must really like me. Therese responded, oh yes, I like being in your presence. But then Therese added in her notebook, but I didn't tell her that that was just from a spiritual standpoint. But we can all relate to those kinds of instances. All of us are familiar with the rule of St. Benedict. Some of us know it inside and out. Sister Aquinata Bachmann, who is an expert on the rule, and I've mentioned her before, she calls to our attention that the way the rule is written, the first part and the last part correspond, and then the second part and the second to the last part correspond, and you can go all the way into the very middle of the rule. And at the very middle of the rule is the most important sentence in the rule from this, method of moving back inward. The central sentence of the rule is, the brothers will serve one another. That's really at the heart of the first good of koinonia. The brothers and the sisters will serve one another. And Benedict set it up in kitchen service so that people took turns in doing the kitchen service. But you know what? When the brothers and sisters serve one another, they serve one another whom they like, and they serve one another whom they dislike. Service becomes, in a very real way, the great equalizer. And then you get served by people that you like, and you get served by people that you dislike. And what's it like to serve someone that you don't like? And what's it like to be served by someone that you don't like? It brings about bonds. And those bonds, can grow. the privilege of love, which is, the name of the Camaldolese book, is not the privilege of loving God. It's not the privilege of being loved by God. It's really the privilege of loving one another, as this whole, first good speaks. Yes?
It reminds me of in the 12-step program, principles above personalities, and how many times that has helped me focus on love because I'm focusing on the principle and not the personality, and it really kind of is a great equalizer when it comes to people that love you or that don't, particularly. And I have found too that interesting, I don't know, but with loving your enemies, I found that like people that I don't really like, if I'm around them a long time, time after time, I actually start liking them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a miracle.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll actually more than like them, I kind of love them, and I think, gosh, I didn't like that person. I wish they was going to go away, and now I'm like, just love seeing them.
Very true. And often what we don't like in other people, we project from what we don't like about ourselves. And when we start to like them, then we start to like that part of ourselves as well. Funny people we are. Could I make one more short reflection before we take our break? It's called the Threefold Good, but it could also be called the good to the nth degree. There just doesn't have to be three. So this becomes archetypal. And in a sense, when we look at the threefold good, different individuals are more attracted to one of the three goods than the other. And one of the things that says is what we're doing is we're connecting our own personal charism, the gifts that we were given in baptism. We're connecting our personal charisms to the charism of the Institute. And even in terms of the monasteries that are in California, the Hermitage obviously emphasizes the second good, which is, solitude and the contemplative life. But that doesn't mean they throw the other two goods out the window. The other two goods are also lived there, but those men choose to emphasize the second good. In this monastery, we emphasize the first and the third goods, living together in community and going out preaching the gospel. But that doesn't mean we throw the contemplative out the window as well. Our monastic life is structured here in such a way that the contemplative life can also flourish, even though we didn't join this monastery in the same way that the hermits joined the monastery up above. And, I'm not all that familiar with the monastery in Berkeley, but they're a monastery, not a hermitage. And so they emphasize their life together, as well as the individual ministries of the monks who are there, who are all doing a variety of different things. And so I think the beauty of the Camaldolese charism, with its threefold good, is there's something for everybody, plus there's an hors d'oeuvre and a dessert that goes with it. You may eat very heavily out of one part of the threefold good, but on the menu, the other two goods are, still there presently. And I think what that does is it sensitizes so that when gifts are differing, that becomes something good rather than, something, that's problematic. One of the Camaldolese prior generals, who in a sense rediscovered the charism long before the Second Vatican Council. So when the Second Vatican Council came along and told all religious orders to get in touch with their charisms, the Camaldolese had a head start because of this prior general named Anselmo Giovanni. And one of the things Anselmo Giovanni would tell the monks who were entering in Italy, the heart of the Camaldolese life is adoration of the Holy Trinity, which is something very beautiful. But the Camaldolese community, in a sense, is structured in a similar way to how Father, Son, and Holy Spirit relate to one another. The Father is quite different from the other two. The Son is quite different from the other two, the Spirit, etc. And yet, they all live one life together in mutual harmony, in mutual perfection, in mutual cooperation. And that's part of what this charism of the Threefold Good is trying to help us to do. It's helping us to model our lives on the Trinity. And when our lives are modeled on the Trinity, adoration of the Holy Trinity becomes natural. It just flows out of who we are. It's like attracting like, the image and the real thing brought into relationship with each other.